Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of the Amusing Panda Warmachine and Hordes live stream. I don't know why I named it that. That is a mouthful to say, but I'm excited to be here. Today we have a lot of really cool guests. Let's bring them on the stage. I'm going to go ahead and let you guys go around robin. We're starting with Alex. Why don't everybody introduce themselves, tell them a little bit about how much they love Warmachine and Hordes. Actually, just introduce yourself, and then I have to do the rest of the intro. So let's do that.
Yep, it's me again. I'm back, still managing animals as usual. Y'all know me at this point, I reckon.
I hope so, yeah.
I play this game a lot. I love it.
Kevin and Mario, you guys are still muted, so go ahead, Kevin.
Hey guys, I'm Kevin. I don't know nearly as much about this game as John and Alex do, but I am going to be behind the scenes helping things run smoother in the future so they can tell you even more about Warmachine, and then I'll just be learning stuff in the background. So happy to be here.
Yeah,
Kevin
Kevin's
has probably the swankiest setup out of all of us in that backdrop there.
I try.
Yeah, it's pretty dope. I'm not going to lie. Say hi,
There's
Mario.
a new Umbra caster with a big sword, and it's definitely a large motivator for me to play that army. So
I dig it.
Hey everyone, my name's Mario. You can't tell that I've done a podcast for many years because I started this muted, so that's good. My name's Mario. I'm from Vancouver, British Columbia. I host a podcast out here, and we have my hands in far too many things in the community up in the Pacific Northwest. I help run the Cascadia Championship Series. We have a podcast called Shop Talk, and we are making and designing things and running tournaments up here in the Pacific Northwest. So that's me.
That's awesome. So before we get started, I just want to, I should have done this before. Sorry guys, this is all new to all of us, but in today's episode, we're going to talk about list building, and we're going to get into some concepts and some kind of fun list designs. Then we're going to start demoing some different Core Dynamos for you. We're going to put them right on War Table and play around with them a little bit and kind of show you all how you stack all the different interactions together, which would be pretty cool. I think we're going to do a little section on Warmachine math in the Getting Better segment. And I guess past that, I wanted to give a couple shout outs. I've been enjoying some other content creators. So first I wanted to shout out Shop Talk, Mario. That I listened to yours and Alex's interview last week, and it was one of the best just interviews that I've ever listened to for Warmachine and Hordes. It was fantastic. So I wanted to shout you out, let you know what a great job you did. I've also been checking out Dice Down. Aaron Wilson has been putting out, I think he puts out like 6 videos a day. I can't keep up with him. The guy's crazy.
Insane.
Yeah. And then I listened to The Business, which is Josh Bates down in Australia. Those guys are hilarious. I don't know all the inside jokes yet. I have no idea who Tom Wiggins is, but I super enjoy that cast. Listen to Battle Driven, Boost a Hit, Tried and True. It's kind of becoming a golden age of Warmachine content. There's a lot out there for you guys. So I just wanted to shout them all out and let them know that I'm watching. So it's for good times for sure.
I don't know if that's supposed to be a Santa way or an ominous way.
Yeah, it's not disappointed Asian father, I promise.
So Tom Wiggins is a gentleman out of England, and he is the creator of Bulldozer Terrain, which is a 3D printable terrain set that's designed for Warmachine. He used to live here in Vancouver, near where I used to live. So I've met him a couple of times, but he's since moved back to England, and he's played on the British WTC team a couple times, and he's just an active personality. He also is a former podcaster for Warmachine back in the Mark III days. So he's done many things in the community.
Very, very cool. Yeah. So now I know who Tom Wiggins is. That's why we do these. Now all of you do too. How exciting is that? All right. Well, I guess we'll start with news and announcements. First, Kevin's joining the team as a producer, which he covered. He's going to do a lot of things behind the scenes, helping to make the stream better. We're super excited about that. Alex and I are going to Portland for Dragon's Fury. I got recruited last minute and somehow got permission from my wife to go to a tournament for a 3rd weekend in a row. I have no idea how that happened. I'm not going to question it. I'm just going to go and pretend like it didn't happen. That's my strategy right now. We'll see how that goes. And I guess Nostilla and Aberration came out. So maybe we should talk about her. What do you guys think?
I think unlike a lot of the Super Junior duos, Nostilla is really the reason you take this pair. Aberration's sort of just an also ran, at least in my limited experience with him on the table.
Yeah, I could see that. One of the things I guess I really like about the model is it looks really freaking cool. So I was pretty excited about that. I also like that it gives access to revive to every faction, which is pretty cool because not everyone has that access. Opens up some new play styles for people. You know, one thing in particular I was thinking about was Man-O-War Shock Troopers plus revive, probably pretty good, or especially the suppressors. Those guys, I guess they're not Shock Troopers anymore, right? They're Wrecking Crew, something like that.
I didn't realize that revive was friendly. It's not friendly faction.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be pretty worthless if it was friendly faction.
It's your dark operations.
Yeah, exactly.
There's plenty of things with the Super Juniors that sort of don't necessarily stack with all the armies that you can take them with. A lot of them, like a lot of the synergies are, you know, work in mercenaries. Like, for example, you can't give Empower focus to Invictus unless you're in a mercenary faction, right? So there are some synergies that only work within mercenaries, and I think that's intentional. But revive being friendly is pretty interesting, I think.
Yeah, I also think in certain lists, Awe will be pretty powerful. You start stacking Awe with like Mortal Fear. It gets pretty gross pretty fast, which is why I'm glad I play an army that doesn't have plenty living models. I mean, we have them, we just don't play that many of them. So, but yeah, I guess let's just go through Nastilla really quick. Alex, you want to go through some of the highlights here with her, and then we'll talk about maybe where we think we can use her?
Yeah, I mean, big highlights to start off with. The defensive stat line is pretty mediocre until you hit defense and control. So on a junior, a control area of 12 is great. She doesn't really have to be super near aberration unless you really want her to be. Defense 16 is also superlative. It can make her very, very hardy to, you know, trivial attacks, which is a big deal. Like, you're not going to make much headway on her with incidentals. Now, dedicated attention is still going to remove her, but she's very safe from stray warriors. Notable features, all while within 5 inches, which is a dangerous place to be, but living enemy models get -2 to hit. This can be great for things like breaking a melee assassination run on your caster from a war beast, or just sitting behind some deaf and arm tanked dudes and making, you know, any attempts to trade with them basically futile. Notable also is Sucker, really augmenting that defense 16. She doesn't have to get hit by ranged attacks unless you want her to free wander. Last big highlight is Vitalizer. So she has the ability to give aberration focus, but she also has the ability to give Raveners or the Garlgast focus, or give focus to the new Crix monstrosity, or give focus to all your other Cephalix monstrosities. So those are some odd things to watch for, just as first level impressions from those first couple of blocks of our rules and abilities.
I think it's worth pointing out monstrosities are, for newer players, are different than warjacks in that they can't be empowered, but focus also doesn't leave them. So turn 1, she gives a focus. Turn 2, she gives a focus before you're really using that focus a lot of the time, which is kind of nice. Because again, it doesn't, as far as I understand, it doesn't come off monstrosities like it does warjacks. If you don't spend a focus on a warjack, it's just into the ether. But you also don't get the benefit of like empower, which makes monstrosities different. Also, I think monstrosities, when they take damage, they get a focus. Is that correct?
Get focus, correct? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's particularly good with aberration, which we'll talk about here in a second. Oh, and Dalen points out that monstrosities run for free. So that is good information to have.
Yep.
All right. Go ahead, Mario.
She seems like a really interesting late game piece to put somewhere that would be really, really hard to remove if your opponent can't hit defense 18.
Yep.
So and with the range 12 spray that has brain damage of all things on it, she seems like she can be contributing in a lot of different ways throughout the mid game, and then, you know, come forwards in the late game if you can't deal with her defense and be pretty hard. Brain damage.
I'm going to say brain damage can be a game ender too. There's
Can.
some casters that if they don't get a turn of casting, it can be real bad.
Yeah. If you can tag Carver with that, you can next turn Big Pig can be pretty challenging to remove. Like there's a few other models that rely on the ability to cast spells that you wouldn't necessarily blow up with one hit. So there's some interesting play for that.
Do you guys? I'm just curious. Do you think that we're going to see a lot of her out there past the experimentation phase, right? I mean, do you think once people start playing with her that she's going to become a staple, kind of like Pig did for a while, or Magnus and Invictus are? Do you think she's of that caliber?
It's difficult to say. I think Mario alluded to the most compelling thing about her, which is supporting mercenary models directly in this edition is pretty dang difficult. And a lot of that is due to, the increasing prevalence of the faction keyword dictating what effects can be granted. A lot of stuff that you can give to mercenaries is like pretty low impact. Now, that's probably one of the few things that like effectively balances Magnus and Invictus. Because they're so strong, they also kind of need to be difficult to support outside of like edge case mercenary lists. And they mostly do their thing in isolation of the rest of the army, which is actually pretty important. Versus Big Pig being primarily an offensive piece was, significantly easier to support because all your caster needs to be able to do is throw an armor debuff downrange, and Big Pig goes from pretty powerful to remarkably powerful. I think as last year showed, like borderline game defining, which is not necessarily the most healthy thing in the world. What's interesting about Nostilla is she seems to flip the that classic equation on his head as we get into her spell list, and we've already talked about things like Awe. She does a lot more of the supporting of your models than you would try and focus on doing with her. And this even applies to Aberration, as we'll get onto with some of his most high impact effects that are like, oh, this can really tee some of my own models up.
Well, we already talked about Revive. I don't see Dark Seduction
That's
being
a
used all
5%.
that much.
Yeah.
Although it is pretty funny against Dusk if they have one of those. They're not battle engines, the big solos.
The void,
make the whites
engines.
The void engines, because as soon as you take it over, all the whites die just instantly. So it's a little bit of tech, but also I think Aberration's an arc node. So if you do need to use it in that 5%, you can use it pretty safely, which is good. We talked about Revive. I want to talk about Vision for a second, because Vision's pretty good on Aberration. You kind of like it, but you put that thing on Kruger, and I think that's going to make people melt. Like, I really do. Yeah. I really think people are going to be like, no, this is not okay.
Yeah, part of the Kruger rebalance was making him harder to kill at a higher price point, which is arguably a buff for him. Now, if you're taking Nostilla and Aberration anyways, and you can have Kruger, why not make Kruger unbelievably obnoxious to kill?
Yep. Oh, man.
I certainly think that there's a lot of things here that can be good in some really key situations. Like, I don't think that this pair of models is going to be amazing in every situation. Like, if you can remove upkeeps, then Vision isn't really if you have a Dusk Sniper team, like, Vision's not really going to be a problem. But there's some situations where you can put this model in the middle of the table. You can give him Mortal Fear or you can apply Mortal Fear to the table and then have Vision on him, and he's going to be very, very challenging to remove in a lot of situations. So I think that there's some corner case places where these models are going to be really good, and I think that for the next little while, you're certainly going to see them. I think the question, though, whether or not they're going to be persistent in the meta, that entirely depends on what happens in January.
Mm-hmm. I think that's fair. I mean, my experience with Nostilla and Aberration, the support she offers is very interesting. Like I said, of the Super Juniors we've seen, I'd almost consider I'd almost consider the aberration the lesser of the pair.
Which is wild. I didn't even think that was
yeah.
possible, to be honest with you.
He's very, very tanky, which is neat. And you know, as we'll come to hopefully at the end of this episode, we'll be talking about some dice math stuff. Impervious flesh really screws with the dice math of the game and makes him harder to kill than one would expect. I think the difficult points for him is, okay, he has the saw catapult, but it's single target. Grievous wounds is neat, just single target though. So, you know, if aberration is not in the fight, he's contributing 1 damage roll. Now, he has adhesive blasters that shadow bind, like outright shadow bind is a super powerful ability, but they're reload 1. So if you want 2 shots of this and you're boosting to hit both because he's only rat 5, I mean, potentially 7, but if you really want these shadow binds to stick, it consumes his entire focus stat to do that. And where he starts to get good and much more interesting is that durability paired with 4 good to great powered melee initials. The weird thing that makes aberration like awkward is he's got a low speed and he's only really contributing most meaningfully when he's in melee. That is a difficult that's a difficult place to live for a 20-point investment. So,
Yeah,
you know, the game I have played against him, he feels like plodding.
Yeah.
And not that sort of visceral engagement factor that you get off of Magnus or Big Pig.
I will say though, he is superlative at just existing. You can't just give blessing to the gods and go remove him like you can Pig or Magnus if you can get a hold of him. I mean, Magnus or Invictus is pretty hard to get a hold of because of Energizer and reposition the card. But let's go through them really quick. Marley, do you want to go through Aberration's rules real quick and just sort of explain why they're good?
Sure. Hopefully I can do a good job of this. So, I mean, speed 5, mat 6, rat 5, defense 10, armor 17, like that's not something to write home about. I think the money makers here, he's got Eyeless Sight, he's got Arc Node, and then he has this hormone manipulation rule where he can choose one of these 3 abilities every turn. So Adrenal Surge is +2 to melee attack damage rolls, and Relentless Charge, which Pathfinder is important. Dopamine Boost, he gets Overtake and Swift Hunter, and then Endorphin Dump, he gets +2 to his attack rolls. So, like, you're swapping out what kind of offensive, essentially melee ability and ability to get through terrain. He's got Hyper Aggressive and he's got Impervious Flesh. So, and then 36 boxes with Armor 17 and Impervious Flesh. Like, that can be challenging to remove. I think that if you can land a couple debuffs on this guy, he's going to go down pretty easily with a couple of charge attacks. But if you can't, like, he can be in certain situations, armor 17 with Impervious Flesh and a Vision. If you can stack a +2 armor on there somewhere or a -2 damage roll, he can be pretty hard to remove. And then he has 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 with a reload. So potentially 7 initial attacks that he can make, which is just an insane amount of output. If he's able to have targets for all of these attacks, it's a lot. And then with +2 damage with Adrenal Surge, he can be pretty high power with some of these melee initials. He's mat 6, which can be a challenge, but you can give him +2 to hit, so he can be landing these things pretty with a mat 8, which is good. So
what I think is kind of cool is you can give him the +2 to damage and then just raw dog and hope you hit the shadow binded spray.
Yep.
Right? And then you're just like cooking with gas. Or you could even, I don't know, I'd have to do the math. In some cases, it might be better to boost with the spray to get the -3 defense and then having +2 damage on all your attacks, because you get 2 additional buys, and then you have, let's see here, 2, 4, 6, 8 potential damage that comes off of that, right? Because it's +2 damage on these 4 initial melee attacks.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Mhm.
He's got a boatload of rules too. Like he's got Grievous Wounds, Shadowbind, Critical Decap on the 2-inch melee, and then he's also got Beatback and Man Catcher. So if you can land the Shadowbind and the Man Catcher, he's hitting with essentially +4 to hit, or +5 to hit, pardon me. Which that's, if you add +2 to hit on there, it's +7. Like he's hitting at a mat 13. That's pretty good.
Yeah. Too bad it's real easy to dance around him. You're just
Yes.
like,
Oh yeah.
my Warcaster runs, you'll never get to me.
Mhm.
Literally
Yeah.
never. Even my slow, dopey Warcaster like Hazaroth, who's speed 5, can still outrun him. So fun times. Oh my God. Sorry guys. I've got to pause for just a second. I got to say hi to some people because there's like a lot of really cool people in the chat. So David, I did see you. I'm so glad you get to be here this week. I wanted to say hi to Dragorian, welcome him back. Say hi to Joe. Joe, it's good to have you. And then this is the one that got me, James Morehouse. Actually, why did you call me Mom if I'm Warmachine Dad? Come on, James, you're killing me. But it's a good crew on here tonight, so let's have some fun. But yeah, I think Aberration. I think what you really want to do is probably use him to exist in a place and make him really annoying to get a hold of and get rid of. So like a defensive babysitter, maybe. I don't think you're sending him ranging out, or, like in payload, he's a perfect thing to escort that stupid 50 millimeter right to the flag, because I don't know.
Yeah, he's great for going and standing somewhere and forcing your opponent to come attack him if they want to be able to make points or stop you from making points. Because then he doesn't have to worry about coming to grips with you, and he can just go weapons free at close range, which is what he's ideally suited to. I think if you go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say he's a counterpuncher extraordinaire.
Yeah, I think if you try and treat this guy like any of the last mercenary super heavies, he's going to disappoint. He doesn't function at all like them.
No, I agree. All right, Mario, Alex, do you guys want to say anything else about this pair? I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about where you expect to see her / him. I don't know. Or should we move on?
I mean, it's too early to say, at least in my experience so far, but Mario, maybe you have some ideas.
Just some people that have been coming up with some interesting ways to use them. So we have a local that is playing Chimera, and they were just thinking about stacking Mortal Fear and Zacchaeus. He's got an ability that's -2 damage rolls and -2 to hit within 5 inches. So essentially making him armor 21 with awe and all those things stacked. It was just an interesting combo to think that could all sort of stack together. And the other thing that he was thinking about doing was Execration of Blackest Night in addition. So there's some synergy there with awe and that spell. But that's the only place that I've seen him so far in the dojo. So
it is interesting because the other two super heavies, you're just like, how do I max this damage output? How do I max the offensive potential? In Aberration, you're just like, what defensive buffs can we get around him, that aren't directly cast on him to make him just super annoying to remove? So I think it's good design. I'm pretty happy about it. I will definitely try it in Hazaroth. I'm not sure how I feel about it, but the revive engine might be really good with him, allowing me to use other pieces of his kit for interesting things. Like I can use more of their buffs, which I like. So we'll see. We shall see. Testing to come.
I mean, yeah, it's letting you save points at least by just dumping Dissus and Valus. So hey, effective cost of you've only got to find 12 more points. That may not be bad.
May not be bad, and it gives you a cohort model that can go. Like a lot of times in Dusk, you're kind of like, I'm having trouble finding a cohort model I want to play besides the silly Spectre, which we talked about last week. Okay, cool. Well, I guess let's move on to our main topic for the night. I was pretty happy with how that turned out. Let's talk about list building. Alex, why don't you go ahead and introduce it, and we'll talk about sort of how we think about list building and where we're going to start.
Sure. So we've opted to take a detour from the intended plan of last week, where we started with playing scenarios, and then we began introducing module components, or how to conceptualize different configurations of units and models in your army that are going to accomplish scenario goals or accomplish some other strategic end. And we thought it would be wise to dive into sort of list building generally with that framework put down. I love your first line in this outline, John. List building is an art and a science.
Yeah, I 100%. I believe that wholeheartedly. There's a lot of people that try to build lists with math. This costs X number of points. It can do this amount of damage. Therefore, it's better than this. And that doesn't really work for Warmachine. It works for 40K a lot of times, because a 40K is often an exercise in what did they screw up on costing a group of models, and what's the max FA of that. Okay, that's where we start in our list building, and then we go to the next most efficient thing. But in Warmachine, you're trying to accomplish all these like scenario goals, and the sum is almost always greater than the parts. So you start sacking synergies to move the math in your favor, and a lot of times you end up building something really cool, but it's quite a Rube Goldberg machine. But that's the fun, right? So that's why I think it's art and science, because if you allow your mind to go in different places without just deciding to eliminate something without really having a good think about it, like sometimes you just discover something that nobody's really played, and that's really cool. I enjoy that part of it.
Yeah, it's possible to build lists that are, on feel and as, very deliberate mechanical calculation. Like, here are the ranges this engages at, here are the powers this engages at, et cetera, et cetera. And the most effective lists tend to be a synthesis of the two. So I tend to be a pretty vibes-based list builder. So, I'll just slap something together on feel, and I'm mostly interested in satisficing, just getting in the right ballpark of something functional. And then the tuning process becomes a lot more scientific. Let's drill into what works here, what doesn't work, what's unnecessary, and how can we really put this in, take this rough concept and make it sing.
Absolutely. Mario, why don't you jump in there?
I just, the concept of list building is really, really interesting to me, because I don't think I've ever spoken to two people that do it the same way. It can be very, very, you can put your own spin on things. You can make it, you can do it so many different ways that it's hard to give advice sometimes to people, because you kind of have to learn how they're building lists first before you can sort of make suggestions. Me personally, I like to kind of start with a caster and then build a battle group and then build units to kind of support my battle group. But there's plenty of people that start with units and start in different places, and some people build list pairs, some people build lists on their own, some people build lists with particular scenarios in mind, some people build lists purely for assassination. And it's like you can do all sorts of different things, and really it doesn't matter as long as there's some functionality and you have success in what you're trying to do. It doesn't really matter how you do it. But yeah, I just think it's so cool that there's so many different ways to do it.
So the first list that I started tuning was Hazaroth, and it was all because I read this one rule. Invocation of Dust. When a friendly undead non-leader faction warrior model within 10 inches is disabled, this model can spend 1 focus point to remove 1 damage point from the disabled model. Boom. That is the whole driving force behind the list that I've been tuning for now 2 weeks and driving Alex absolutely nuts. So my list design process is often I find something that I find interesting, and then I try to figure out, okay, what's the best way I can support this? How do I cover up the weaknesses for it? So, in Mark II, I played a ton of Testament of Menoth, because I thought getting a soul token for every warrior model you have in your entire list means that revive effectively costs 1, and he was focus 6. So I could literally the first 6 or 7 models a turn, because I think I had another bonus focus from Rax. The first 7 models a turn you killed didn't count. And then after that, I got I got 1 for 2 back for the rest of that turn. And it was
Yeah.
just, I was like, as a concept, I can build around this. And anyway.
You had Harmonious as well.
Yeah, that's also true. Yep. That is also true.
John, were you playing in Mark III when Makeda Cats was a thing?
Probably not.
So Makeda, Archdominant Makeda 2, I believe, she had a very similar ability. It is called
Stay dead.
Stay death.
Stay Death. Yeah, very similar ability. So she would do the same thing. You would play Power Swell on her, and then she'd be able to keep 8 cats alive a turn, and they'd have tough and steady, and she could make them +2 defense, and it would just be trying to get through that Stay Death was a challenge. I think it's similar here with Azeroth.
Yeah. I don't want to focus too much on Hazaroth, but I just wanted to point that out that whenever I go into list building, I pick a caster I want to play, and usually it's because they do something interesting that I can think about. Because for me, list building is the best part of the game. You know what I mean? Like, it's just so much fun to think about all the different ways you can build a list. And believe me, Alex will tell you, I've probably sent him 1,000 lists for Hazaroth in 2 weeks. Maybe not.
I don't know that it's 1,000, but we've definitely crossed like the 12.5 threshold as we've
sure.
worked on fine tuning.
Yeah. So anyway, let's just talk about some core principles in list building. So I've got some rules that I follow, and I don't, your mileage may vary, but one of the things I'd like to say is support taxes are theft, right? It's way easy to put way too much support in a list and end up in a situation when you're kind of like, you don't have enough models that do work. And I tell new players all the time, like, take all the support out, play with all business models, and then figure out what you couldn't live without and put that in. You know what I mean? And then move on, because it's way too easy to be like, okay, I've got these 11 buffs, these 11 solos that buff my guys, but I only have 2 things that fight, and then they get killed, and then I have 11 solos that buff nothing, and it's not that cool. So,
right, exactly. Yeah, and it's really important too, just how much when you're looking at support elements, you really want to lean into support elements that can also fight, models that do useful things other than I cast the 1 buff.
I think it's really, Mark IV has really brought a bit of a new spin on support as well. Like, gone are the days that you pay 4 points for a solo that does 1 thing. And I think there's still quite a bit of remnants of that in legacy factions. Like, I played Gators for most of the first year and a half of Mark IV, and there's some solos in that army that pay points for, and they do 1 thing, and then they don't really contribute to the game as they go on. But I think for the Mark IV armies, that's changed quite a bit. Like, there's a lot of solos that have support abilities and multiple good support abilities, but also can contribute in melee at late game. Like, the example that I keep coming back to is the House Callus, what's his name? The
Mage Hunter Commander?
The Mage Hunter Commander, right? Because he's got 3 fantastic abilities that he can choose from, and then he's also got a Weapon Master, and he has a gun that is very, very useful, and then he's also got Spyglass. So, like, you're paying 4 points for multiple different abilities, and I think that is really prevalent through the Mark IV armies as well. You get a lot of work out of your support at the same time, and that's one of the reasons that I believe that, in this edition of the game, the Mark IV armies have been a lot more popular. There's many reasons why they've been really, really popular, but I think that that's sort of a hidden bonus to a lot of these armies, is you just get a lot of good stuff in your support.
Yeah. The more good examples might be like gun mages and grave diggers. They're going to spend a fair chunk of the game handing out focus, but you don't necessarily feel bad for bringing strictly more gun mages than you need, because they can run around like throwing out range 13 snipe shots, which is pretty nice, or electro leaps as the game closes. Another good example is somebody like Stella Baron, their battle plan bot. Or at least their more important one, also brings a pretty kick-ass AoE gun to the table. Like the Mage Hunter Commander, the Storm Legion Officer is fantastic. He hits like an absolute truck, and also has a random utility gun. Some of the models where you like start to fall down in terms of like, okay, they support models, but they don't really do anything else. Like, I think Winter Core is one of the biggest culprits. Volkova is, a little more versatile, but you look at Arcanus and like mechanics, like, what is my purpose? You fetch the butter. In the main, most of the Mark IV factions you can tell have like a 20 years of design experience behind them. The legacy factions don't necessarily. So it's common, but not necessarily ubiquitous. And you don't want to be, drowning in butter fetching bots. You know what I mean?
It's true. One thing that I think is important just for good list design is, as a general rule, it's better to lead in to where you're strong than it is to try to cover up all your weaknesses. That's what your second list is for. Mm-hmm. So there's this concept I see a lot of people struggle with where they're like, think about all the meta boogeymen and then try to have an answer in their list for everything, and then their list doesn't do anything. I would rather have your list laser focused on doing what it does and making its game plan so strong that it forces your opponents to react to you. So in essence, you're asking questions instead of answering questions. I used to do a lot of Magic drafts, and I used to tell people when I was teaching them how to draft, like, look, it's really not hard. You either draft a creature that's really good and ask a question, or you draft an answer to the creature, which is, you know what I mean? That's really, the game is questions and answers. So I would rather you lean into asking hard questions than trying to have all the answers to the exam.
That's interesting, because I found over the last, you have to ask some questions, and they'd better be pretty pointed. But I've found my philosophy has shifted over the last few years, much more toward being answer based because of the added flexibility in most lists. You have random band-aids and command cards, you have the spell rack, stuff like that. I used to be very much in your camp, and I have gradually shifted to like, yeah, my list should ask some pointed questions, but it should mostly be focused on being able to reconfigure itself to fight a wide range of opponents.
I guess go ahead, Mario. I'm sorry.
I think Steamroller kind of exacerbates that too, because Steamroller now is much more dynamic than it used to be. So I think asking a hard question when there's a central zone in the middle of the table, that's a little bit easier. But when you have moving scenario pieces and really wide scenarios, a lot of times you need to come up with answers on the fly to sort of accommodate for scenario. So like building a lot of answers into your lists is key, I think, for scenario play in particular.
Yep. And this is going to tie into the one of the other areas we're going to come to later. But if you're asking questions in Mark IV, in general, asking defensive based questions doesn't work as well as it used to. And nowadays you're mostly concerned with your questions being offensive in nature. Mm-hmm. That you're just going to develop a really, really brutal offense on some vector, and then durability you'll discover in different ways. It tends to be much more micro level than it was like skews in the past.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I probably should clarify what I mean, because by no means am I telling you to only do one thing and do it well. I'm a big believer in list flexibility. As a matter of fact, I love list flexibility, and the ability to morph into to combine different modules and different pieces to like form Voltron in different ways is very important. But if you have, I guess the way I would explain it is, if you have the choice between I have this, I don't know, super hard matchup against things with stealth, so I put 2 Mage Hunter commanders. I mean, this is a bad example because Mage Hunter commanders go in every list. They're totally fine. But let's say you put the Mage Hunter commanders in just for Spyglass, okay? And then your second list is Helith, who has True Sight and has True Sight to her battle group. Well, if you have a problem with stealth, I would rather have Helith just handle that for me and not potentially reduce the power of my list or the focus of my list that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah, you don't want to sell out your list. Like let it be its thing and do what it does well.
I don't.
Mario, you have a fan. Did you see this?
Is that Mario?
That's
Big
Dave.
fan. Look at that.
Hi, Dave. David is my local Chimera player. Good friend of mine.
Welcome to the show.
I can give an example of like selling out a list. One of the early permutations I played with Kane I did try the general with Kane. Mostly because like, well, this army doesn't really develop battle group damage at all outside of guns. Like maybe it would be nice to have this model that does the things the general does. And it turns out to absolutely be the wrong plan because the general mostly like dirtled around until he died. Because nobody supported him. Like the rest of the army didn't move in ways he liked or cared for. And it was a compromise in my list to like try and have it all that was actually the wrong play.
That is a great example.
To be fair, John, I don't think that it's wrong to build questions into your list either, nor do I think it's wrong to, build lists that are question lists either. I just think that gone are the days of putting 3 colossals down with an armor buff and saying, here, deal with that. Because I think that the meta has kind of come to a place where there's a lot of answers built into list pairs already for those sorts of things. And so like I think that sometimes when you're I think it's hard to build a question list and an answer list. I think that you need to be thinking about more like the combination of the two things. So I don't think that you're like you don't have a point in saying that you should have questions in your list, but yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, I think what I originally, not that I'm getting pedantic, but I said if you have a choice of leaning into one or the other, I would lean into asking questions first and then try and round out my list and keep it flexible. But your list has to do something at the end of the day. Like it has to have a core function of, okay, this is what it's built to do. And it does this thing really well. Like Kane is a great example. This list is built to alpha you and just make you wish you were not playing something else because it just kills everything you love. Right. Okay, cool. All right, Alex, do you want to move on to the next part of the subject, I guess?
Yeah, so we'll be moving into, and I guess this is your preferred methodology. I'm casting about in my mind's eye to think of like, okay, where are some places where the counter is the case? But I'll let you know if I think of them. But start with what's driving your bus. Start with the caster. In general, casters will dictate a lot about how the army functions. In most factions, they're pretty wildly different from one another, and don't necessarily substitute that well. So your caster will be, sort of dominant in a lot of your army construction, starting points. Like, okay, here's what I offer in terms of offense. Here's what I offer in terms of defense, threat range, feat, all these things. What goes well with this? What kind of bus does this caster want to be driving? Yeah,
you can do it. I will say you can do it the opposite way too. If there's models you really like, for example, I don't know, say you play Necrofactorium and you're like, I love those Night Terrors. They're just so cool. Well, you could say, okay, I'm going to start with this core of Night Terrors. How do I support them? Which caster supports them the best? And then you can expand. You can build around this starting module. I've also built lists that way where I've decided there's a model I want to play, and how do I support it? So you can do it both ways, but the caster still is driving a lot of the list decisions at that point, right? So,
I mean, I think of all the factions, it's probably Necrofactorium, Winter Core, and Brine Bloods, where you actually want to build the bus first and find the driver. But that's not always the case. In most factions, it's usually like, in general, it's just a good idea to start with the caster. And reasons that will deviate off of that are either particularly powerful elements or like independent operating modules, or relatively homogenous casters. So like Necrofactorium's much more like, okay, very powerful operating modules. Let me find who runs this bit of stuff better, versus Brine Bloods and Winter Core, where the casters are really like surprisingly homogenous, and you're just picking your favorite toys and then auditioning.
Yeah, who runs the Mana War the best?
Yeah.
I think if we're giving out new player advice, I think that generally you want to advise people to start with a caster. And I think that it's a more advanced concept to try and build a list first without, and then sort of add in a caster a little bit later. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, because they have some of the most high impact things you're going to have. They tell you what kinds of buffs you have in addition to your faction's rack, and feat can often be pretty definitive in how your army operates.
One thing, I guess, I didn't put this in the outline, but I do want to share. There's a lot of modules within armies that sort of go together. We talked about a couple last week, a Bison and the officer. I forget the name of the officer who gives it a reroll.
Winter Core officer.
Winter Core officer. Yeah, fair enough. Those two go together like peanut butter and jelly, right? So that's a module that you can put in any list. You can literally put it in any list. So what you'll find across time as you start building lists is you'll become familiar with how a module plays, and then you'll wonder, how does this fit in the game plan of my list? How does it fit with my caster? And list building will sort of build the experience of playing and building different lists will sort of build a library for you to check out. Like, I need this book, I'm going to put in, 2 units of Winter Guard to go flank with this Bison. And I know it'll work because I've played it in 3 other lists or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and often even when your caster will make some decisions about your list. So, for instance, I'm playing Major Anson Wolf. Big elements. He's got on-tap damage buffing with positive charge, so big synergy between Warjacks and infantry that you kind of want both together. He's got Energizer, more battle group movement, which is fantastic. And then he's got, dealer's choice of rack slots. The Storm Legion rack is pretty balanced in terms of what you can apply it to. His feat is when a warrior model dies, a model in his battle group immediately moves 2 inches and makes an attack. Now, what that suggests is, A, that you want battle group models that can launch worthwhile attacks during your opponent's turn and have that be super impactful. And 2, you want a lot of bodies that your opponent is obliged to kill. So Wolf actually dictates like a lot of your basic list design just from his get-go. He's mostly battle group focused, but he has this feat that can be ridiculously high impact that says, you need to bring dudes. You need to bring dudes. Anyways, the Wolf's army tends to build around that kit rather rapidly. Typically, you want like 15 to 20 guys, bare minimum. You want one badass melee heavy that can move forward and seriously threaten your opponent if they continue allowing it to develop position. And you want at least one heavy with a gun that will really, really like make them regret attacking you, even if you don't get to develop position out of that. So that leaves you with sort of just put it on auto build. You're spending about 60 points for 2 jacks with quality attacks, and then 3 to 4 big-ish units plus like attendant, support staff and stuff. That's Wolf's entire Dynamo. Like, hey, he gets to play the way he wants to play, but he's still got like 30 to 40 points left to play around with and add accents or supporting elements. But for the most part, in that like 60 to 70 points, he's off to the races. He is doing this thing that is particularly oppressive if you're an all melee army.
So, Alex, I've got a question for you. I've been given this advice in Mark 4 already, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. Actually, I know how I feel about it, but I want to hear about how you feel about it. Should you pick a lane with your caster?
Pick a lane?
What that means is a lot of casters can do multiple things well, and you can lean into one lane or try to be flexible enough to use others. I'll use Hazaroth as an example. Hazaroth has Escort and Shadowmancer, so he buffs Jax better than almost anyone else in Dusk for the most part. Like, gives him stealth, gives him Curse of Shadows, and gives him plus 2 inches of speed. Fantastic. He also has Invocation, which is fantastic with the medium bases, right? And so everybody I talk to about Hazaroth literally use these words. You have to pick a lane. You either need to go Jack heavy or infantry heavy. And I just thought it was interesting. And I wonder if you agree with that advice in general. And maybe Hazaroth is a special case because he is a little split brained, but
I mean, I think I'm actually a huge fan of Hazaroth as a caster, and I think it's perfectly valid not to pick a lane, particularly if you're, there's only so many high value warriors you can get into a Hazaroth list, and you just run out of them before you run out of points. True. It often makes sense for him to like, okay, well, I have this other thing I can do really, really well, and I'm maxed out on the one. What if I have the option to where when the strategic situation says revive plus invocation of dust is not going to work that great if I just mode switch into stealth dark shroud heavies and just have a push button healing for the second you start making real inroads on that hit point pool. It's a totally valid thing. It's not universally applicable. There are some casters that in order to realize their core shtick have to commit so hard in terms of total point spend that they don't have room left over for a mode switch. But I think most of the Mark IV casters are at least capable of some mode switching. And it's worth putting thought into. Like, for instance, Shadow Tongue, I commit like in a big battle group Shadow Tongue list, I'm committing about 60 to 65 points to battle group or so. But I still have mode switch room into okay, like my heavies can sort of just buy time and I can use Perdition to like shove the battle around and push pieces away. But the thing that's going to make me win is hitting Revive and Grim Returns over and over again with Shadow Tongue and Surgeons. And it's worth having a plan B built out.
I like that. Actually, I love the idea of having a plan B where you're just like, oh, my primary plan is not going to work. What is plan B? Oh no, I picked a lane, so I only have my primary plan. That's a problem, or it can be. Mario, what do you think?
I think that.
Go ahead.
I think that pick a lane. I think in a lot of cases that means, the thing that you're going to focus on for most of the game. But like Alex said, I think that in a lot of cases there is room to mode switch, and I think that it's to build muscle memory. And this kind of ties back into the module discussion where you practice with particular sets of models and you do the same thing over and over again to build muscle memory with that module. I think casters in a lot of ways can be very similar, where you'll have a particular set of abilities in mind that you're going to be using every game, and you're going to practice those things and you're going to build muscle memory with those things. But as you get more experience, as you play more games, as you learn that caster, there will be moments where opportunities will present itself to do that mode switch. And like for example, with Harusk, right? Like if he's running a Garlgast, he's going to be doing Windstorm, and he's going to be handing focus to the Garlgast. And then if the opportunity presents itself for him to run a Arc Node and knock something down with a Thunderstrike, he has the ability to mode switch into Assassination mode or something like that. And I think when you're putting a Garlgast on Harusk, your main plan is going to be handing it focus and casting Windstorm and doing some rerolls. And I think that is an example of picking a lane. But I don't think that it's good play tactics to only do those things and not have those things in the back of your mind.
Yeah, Harusk is such a good example because a lot of his big value adds are I provide rerolls to everything. I have an armor buff feat. And that tends to be where people leave it. And like, I have a big fat stack of focus. Harusk's game plan, just based on like his core most effective competencies, is actually relatively low agency. That plan of armor feat, cast windstorm, maybe cast IR, that sort of thing, is very much let your models move forward and do their thing. You're mostly hoping that your opponent, can't respond effectively to the armor feat and gets involved in a big dumb punch up where they don't make much headway, and you're just going to be much more consistent because you have rerolls. But there's not a lot of room for strategy in there. And canny players, especially armies that, have an ability to like put a hook in your nose and drag you around by it, Horusk has very little ability to interfere and stop that from occurring unless, you make like a low cost investment like in a Jackal Arc node, and maybe he goes and babysits the payload for most of the game. But that Jackal Arc node offers you the ability to mode switch from this low agency, high impact plan into, okay, now we need to get tactical. I need to start casting Thunder Strike and Vanish every turn, and like looking for opportunities to apply this big POW 17 blood boon, and to apply at range, not just knockdowns, but at range slams. There is like, if anything will let you grab a game by the short hairs and say, no, I'm taking control of the direction the next few turns are going in, is the ability to just start throwing reliable long range slams.
Yeah, it's great for threatening the assassination. It forces your opponent to protect their caster, and then also it just gives you some scenario leverage where you're just, oh, that guy's towed into the zone. Yeah, let's just slam him out of there because I can't kill him. Maybe it's a heavy and I can't get to him, right?
I mean, surprise, surprise, the best caster in the game has a lot of different plays that he can do.
Are you going to let Mario say that, Alex? Didn't you have a take? Did you say something about Ragemonger beating Horusk 100 out of 100 times? I swear you said that.
No. I specifically said Shadow Tongue. I think.
Oh, my bad. Not Ragemonger, Shadow Tongue. I got him confused.
Big battle group Shadow Tongue, I think Horusk struggles to win that more than one game in 5.
Doesn't sound like the best caster in the game to me, Mario. I'm just saying.
Just because he has one bad matchup.
Yeah, Shadow Tongue has lots. Yeah, but it's even like you are making mostly a commit to a plan with Horusk, but like, you have to be aware of the limitations of your plan, particularly when you are like picking a lane. If you're picking a lane, then boy, does your it's urgently important that your second list not pick a lane and be a bit more like,
Generalist?
A bit more of a Renaissance man list, A
Sevi 1 list. It's just like,
sure, Sevi 1 was my list B for years. He's fantastic.
Yeah, you can just play into anything. You're just like, I'm good at hitting stuff. I'm good at damaging stuff. Everything in my army is just a little better, and that's enough.
Yeah.
So.
Like, I wager 90% of the field doesn't like getting hit by Rat 8 POW 17s. Let's just do that.
I think this is an interesting point. There's such a way to build a list that feels aimless. Maybe that's where the advice to pick a lane was coming from.
I think so. Especially so for you, John, in particular, because you have a lot of muscle memory from playing Warmachine many years ago, but because you're coming back and some of the challenges that you've been describing that you've been having over the last couple of weeks, I think that's really good advice to really hone in on learning how to manage your clock and learning how to learn your own army and the synergies that you build into your list, and then getting that down and using that pick your lane with a caster to sort of solidify a lot of those lessons in Mark IV. And then, as you play more games, get more experience, and then sort of have more opportunities where you can mode switch and you can say, okay, I've been doing this. I've have my lane picked. I've practiced this, but I see this opportunity. Now I'm going to take it, and then building that muscle memory, being able to do that more and more often. So I think that is good new player advice. Is here's your list. This is what it does. You're gonna practice those things over and over and over again, and on game 7, you're going to try and find an opportunity to mode switch as opposed to game 1.
Right. So it's like sort of avoiding the trap of like, there's a couple of traps that newer players can fall into. One of which is, I'm just going to play a good stuffs list. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to pound the button over and over and over again on, a bunch of the same sort of high value things. Like every list is going to start out with these 2 units of cav and this solo and this heavy and yada yada yada. And like, while all these independent things may be good, they're sort of like, they're like a soup where the ingredients or flavors are not synced up. Another example is like, well, I just play, some kind of, I play this same kind of heavy in every list. Why wouldn't I play it here? It's like, because in here, mostly what you need is babysitters to go and score flags, and your heavies cost too much points. Like, you've got a really solid infantry core army, and your battle group is fighting against it because you've become like a creature of habit. If you're going to play this infantry game with this infantry caster, get those expensive premium heavies out of here and just play that game.
I think the other thing that sort of is involved in this conversation is the analysis paralysis issue, right? Like if you find yourself clocking out in a lot of games or going to time in a lot of games, and it's because you have a lot of different things that you can do and you're trying to decide between them. Like if you pick a lane and you're going to just come hell or high water, I'm going to do the same thing every single turn. Like the more you practice that, the less you're going to clock out. And then, when you have that time, issue under your belt, that's when you can start allowing yourself to go into the tank a little bit more and start using some of the other things that your caster and your army can do.
Yeah, I think more of my time issues are not so much from not knowing what strategy to utilize, more like, how do I position this model properly? You know what I mean? Like, there's just so many things you have to think about. Like, okay, where are my shield guards going? Okay, my shield guards are going. How do I not get in the way of these guys? Because I don't have tactician, right? So you develop muscle memory for all that kind of stuff pretty quickly. But the first time you're like trying to set up, okay, for example, if I was thinking about a Kane matchup, right? And they have Deuce, and Deuce has got an AoE, right? So I'm like, well, I think what I have to do is make my cats shield guards, because they can't be within 2 inches of each other because they can't take the blast damage. Because with Decrepit and then Powerful Shot, like you one-shot medium bases or large bases with the blast damage. It's really disgusting and gross. I just want to say that for the record, Alex. It's not right. I don't think you should be able to do that.
I am fully aware that I am the Satan in your current moral universe right now.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But when you go to execute something like that, like an intricate plan to like blunt something like that, it takes a long time to figure out where all the models are going, where if you had been playing that list for a long time, like you would just do it, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
All right. One of the things I want to talk about is, I think, and this is kind of an important concept that I don't think we've talked about, but you have to understand what your list is designed to do from a game plan perspective, right? So I have 2 lists currently that I'm playing in a list pair that look identical. Like they look like identical lists. I'm playing Helith and Hazaroth, and they have a completely different game plan. Helith is built to alpha you into oblivion, right? Basically, I'm going to come up in feet and I'm going to blow everything up. Hazaroth has a lot of the same models, but he's built to play like a catcher's mitt, right? He's built to have enough guns to force you to engage with me, and I'm just going to play the long game. And I'm not trying to alpha you. I'm just trying to sandpaper a little bit of your army away every turn without giving away my army. So the lists play completely differently. So when you're building your list, you have to think about, what is my plan? How do I plan on engaging with this game? Am I trying to be like Kane and blow everything up so my opponent has no way to respond? Or am I Am I trying to force engagement? Am I trying to overwhelm scenario? Am I trying to jam hard, with massive threat ranges? I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can sort of design the overall strategy of your list. But if you understand that, I think it's really important because it helps formulate list decisions, but it also helps you when you're playing the list, if that makes sense.
It's funny, John. I'm playing Dusk right now, and I'm playing Helith and Tyrus. And it's actually flipped. The Helith list is the catcher's mitt, and the Tyrus list is I'm going to buy 14 inches of the table, and make you respect my threat ranges. And if you step into them, then I'm gonna punish you for it. It's interesting.
Hey, we have a wild Brad Park.
Yeah,
Alex,
I saw that.
Read this. Yeah, let's talk about it.
When building lists, it's important to look for synergies and building towards strengths. Take Jalam, for example. He has prey and a gun. That model takes snipe and far strike well to let him play safer. I'm not sure if this is meant to be a personal attack because I often ran Jalam without far strike, but good to hear from you, Brad.
Yeah, it's good to see you, Brad.
But here's the question, Alex. Did you ever put an extra savage in your list?
I did.
No.
I 100% did that. But to be fair, that was just so we're clear, I cheated for a whole day because we did a thing at Gen Con.
Your savage cheating incident?
My savage cheating incident. We traded lists with other people, and the guy put an extra savage on the tray. Anyway.
Oh, thanks, Brad. I'm glad I understood that.
Yeah, it's good. Anytime a dig on Cosmo is a win for us all. That's how I look at it, Brad. So thank you, sir, for contributing to the stream. That was amazing. All right, where were we?
I forget.
We kind of wandered off topic.
We did a little bit. Let's just get back on. And this is where we start tying into what we talked about last week.
Oh, we lost you,
John. Your audio cut.
Let me say that again. There's this little mute button on the side of my mic that I like to bump because I get excited, like my hands get animated. Hey, Charlie, how are you? Anyway, what I was saying is we'll just bring it back to last week's discussion about scenario play. Now we're going to start talking about really the modules we talked about last week is a good way to put your list together with your overall plan for playing scenario. The reason why is most of the games that you're going to win in Warmachine are going to be scenario victory or driven by scenario victory, right? Like you're so far ahead in scenario, your opponent brought his caster in at a last-ditch attempt to try and kill you on a 20% or something and failed, right? Where you kill their caster, but really it was scenario that kind of drove that home for you.
Yep, exactly. Couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah, I did I mean, this is the whole reason it's your favorite part of the game. For me, it's almost like a necessary evil, but list building became very important because we were talking about, very composition heavy subjects last week, and it's definitely worth getting into.
What do you start with in your list construction? You put your core dynamo in first?
I usually put my core dynamo in first, yeah. Unless it's something where I just know that there's functionality that a faction needs, and I'm gonna have to it's hard to start a Brine Bloods list without pushing Marauder Crew twice.
Or four times.
Or four times. But even if you're not going full dude spam, you usually need to hit that button at least twice just to guarantee that you have enough bodies that are able to play scenario and still contribute meaningfully. So there are some cases where okay, the faction really needs somebody to go and do this. I'll take Marauder Crew, just as a sort of by default. Lockbash Brothers gives you some options, but when I'm in Storm Legion or Winter Core, I will typically start with a core dynamo. Wolf has those considerations based around his personal kit. He wants about 15 to 20 bodies minimum, and probably at least 2 heavies minimum, 1 to shoot and 1 to scoot. So that probably winds up being like the first 60 or so points in my list. When I was building Kane, it was like, what's the best value gun Kane can get pound for pound? It's coursers with storm throwers. So let's throw Kane and 4 coursers into a list and see where we go from there. And it's also a little bit odd in like Storm Legion 2, because there are things I will always reach for. Like I will always want a Storm Legion officer. And I'll almost always want storm throwers, because that unit is disproportionately good versus their cost.
That's interesting. So do you consider that to be part of your core dynamo then?
Not necessarily. So I actually, I wasn't sure if we were going to get into War Table today, but I did go ahead and drop my Kane list on a blank table, because the list has a couple of things. It's got a core dynamo that, like I talked about last week, is remarkably cheap. So it's, Kane with 4 coursers. So, this core dynamo here, and, the coursers pick up their damage buff from the Zephyr. And, we get some mandatory support from the Storm Legion officer. This core dynamo is only about 40 points. It's very, very cheap for the core of an army. And this will typically range in the center of a board. Looking essentially to say, okay, you can attack these 7-point jacks, but is it really worth it? You're basically always going to be trading down. And I have shield guards, and I'll bring in storm veins over here, just to make it very difficult to shoot at and not particularly worthwhile to charge. But the core dynamo gets to do its thing, like, if you give me juicy targets in ideal range where like Kane and all 4 coursers can get to it, they'll wipe it out. And then rearrangeable is the rest of the army. So we have storm throwers, we have Deuce under Sarah Brisbane. It's worth pointing out that Kane's feat affects all warjacks, not just warjacks in his battle group. And then storm lances and arcane mechanics, Black 13th. So this can all be put together in a variety of ways where, like, often what you'll see is one flank will be like, Black 13th goes off this way, and they go off with Deuce also because he has accumulator, but also sort of because they compound each other. They're sort of an overwhelming shooting threat that's difficult to come to grips with. And then, like, often the storm lances will go together with the storm throwers, and they'll kind of just gravitate together because, hey, we all have electrical attacks. I have a big volume of ranged and a big volume, and a good volume of high-powered melee that also has electrical ranged. But what can happen is, like, we can mix this up and go, okay, Black 13th actually isn't necessarily great against an opponent who is using defenses fastidiously, but it turns out storm throwers are. So Deuce and the storm throwers team up. I don't have to worry about the accumulator because Sarah's got his back. And, say in that case, it may be something like the storm lances come over to join the core module and, forfend or oppress a particular flank, or say, hey, if you try and come into these coursers, it's really going to suck for you. Black 13th may even go in there as like sort of the advanced scouting party, like, Black 13th is going to go stand in the central forest, and you're going to have to send somebody to weed them out, which will give these coursers a bunch of free sprays. So it's reconfigurable. Or like Deuce goes with Cav to like, okay, this is payload. Your primary objective that's going to get you the lion's share of the points is all the way on the other side of the board on one flank. I'm going to have models that can cross that board as quickly as possible, and a model that can put damage down range as fast as possible. And I'm going to make it really unappealing for anything less than a committed force to sit on your 50 mil on payload. Likewise, all of these elements can recombine and just go to the center of the board with the core dynamo. Because I have tactician from the officer, there's a lot of room for models to get all up inside each other, having overlapping shield wall, overlapping Windweaver auras and stuff like that. And
what I would
freedom.
give for tactician. You have no idea.
I have the freedom to activate my army back to front. Low key thing that this formation telegraphs, by the way, it's essentially 100 points all in one place. What it means is anything that you put in front of this army, all of these modules combine into one to, I don't care what you put there. I'm going to turn, the 12 inches directly in front of my formation into pavement. Nothing is going to survive, and there's going to be a straight line to your caster.
That's interesting. I think Brad actually put a pretty cool point up here. He said when he's building lists, he tries to have a little overlap in the models being used to give his opponent a choice in list selection, because he's going to be attacking, even with the same models or similar models, he'll be attacking the game from two different vectors, which I think is pretty smart. That's like kind of next level thinking with your list pairs, right? A little outside the scope of what we're talking about for building a single list. But yeah, I think that's an interesting core module that you have there. Mario, did you have any questions about that, or did you want to share what you brought for class today?
I just think it's interesting, like playing a lot in Mark III and then moving to Mark IV. One of the things that struck me is one of the main differences between the two editions that play is that oftentimes you see units that work together on a flank, like 2 or 3 units, or you'll have a unit and a couple of solos sort of supporting each other out on a flank. And cavalry is interesting as well, because oftentimes, you were talking about this last time, John, where they can spread out with a reposition move and then threaten a lot of different angles on the table. But with the way that unit movement works now, you can, without tactician even in a lot of cases, you can sort of leapfrog your units in and around each other and sort of like bring up your support units where before in Mark III you would have had to like try and weave your support units in. You can kind of like bring one up, pop out the rest of the guys, and they can support multiple things at the same time, whereas that was a lot more challenging in Mark III. So a lot of times you see sort of 2 units and a solo, or a unit and 2 warjacks kind of off on a flank, sort of supporting each other with their abilities and the ability to sort of like move around each other and charge through gaps and then bring the rest of the unit in through those gaps. So it's kind of interesting. I think it's a core difference in this edition.
I like that. I like that a lot. So once you've added your core dynamo, then you have to think about playing scenario. Go ahead, Mario.
No, go. Sorry, sorry for interrupting you. Go for it.
No, you're fine. I was just saying, while Mario is loading that, we talked about this concept of babysitters. I would say your list is required to have a core dynamo. Not really, but I mean, it's kind of what the list does. So if you don't have a core dynamo, like, what are you doing? Brad, we're going to be on here for another 45 minutes, and I can send you a link. You can jump on through any browser right on your phone if you want. It's pretty cool. And that goes for anybody that ever wants to jump on the show. If you're interested in a subject, we'd like to bring people up and just talk, right, and get going. Brad, send me a message on Facebook. I'll send you the link. So anyway, what I was saying is, I think required modules, you have to have babysitters and you have to have a core dynamo in your list. Past that, time wasters, support, and skirmishers are sort of more optional depending on how you want to address your army.
Right. Yeah, they probably should be roles you've given consideration to be able to, pull models out of your core dynamo to go and reconfigure this if this is what the situation calls for. So a lot of times you'll be, and it's not just scenario driven, you'll be confronted by an opponent who actually pressures you with uncertain skirmishing engagements, and you'll have to take the troops that you have to hand and say, okay, who can win or at least not lose this fight if I need to configure them together and go off and do this. So it may not be their primary responsibility, but you should have models that can do multiple things.
So sort of this is some models that I've pulled up here. This is the tiers list that I've been playing, kind of to illustrate a couple different points that you've made. So, like, for me, I like to have a lot of similar things on different sides of the table. I like to have a lot of synergy is the wrong word. What's the word I'm looking for? Symmetry. I like to have a lot of symmetry in my lists. So when I build lists, I like to build a lot of symmetry into it. And the lane I like to pick with Tyrus is sort of leveraging his feat and the ghost walk, or the ghost sleeve that it brings, because there's not a lot of Pathfinder in Dusk, and sort of leveraging the threat range game, and then also the ghostly, sort of buying that 14 inches of table space with those models. But cavalry oftentimes can't do it on their own. They can be quite fragile if they're just out in the middle of the table. So I play defenses with this list. So I've got units of kitty cats on either side of the table behind defenses, or trying to leverage some terrain, and usually they're off to quite a far flank at the edges of my 14-inch control area. And then supporting them, I have sniper teams on both sides, so that they can rip off upkeeps and make some poignant removal of models. And then I've also got arc nodes with the blaster fist. I'm really enjoying the blaster fist in Dusk. I really like the beatback on it. Like, just being able to say, hey, you brought up a heavy and you're contesting? Not anymore. I can, without removing a hard to remove model, I can score scenario points just with that ability. And then I have units of shield guards that can come up and support those cats on either flank. And then in the middle of the table, I have my core dynamo. So it's Israfil and Tyrus. And then I have the Void Engine in this list as well, because I know that I'm going to be losing Guardians. So being able to sort of leverage that, and then Dices in the middle and Kruger to try and add some damage in the middle. But, like, for example, with Tyrus, I think in the 12 or 13 games that I've played with him, I've cast Stranglehold 2 times, maybe. Usually he's there casting Deceleration and Battle Lust. And that's what he's for, is just trying to make sure Israfil is filled up with focus, and she's hard to remove in the middle of the table, armor 21 against ranged attacks, and just sort of threatening that space in the table with those long threat ranges. But that the cats and the shield guards just sort of try and work together. And support each other with the guns from the Arc Node Ghast and from the Mage Hunter sniper teams.
Hey guys, check it out. Hey Brad, welcome to the stream.
Whoa.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Oh wow.
Hello. By the way, I love the mustache. I haven't seen you with the new mustache, because last time I saw you, you were like, well, it was like 10 years ago, right? So it's been a while.
I'm sure I have the game saved in my phone somewhere on Iron Grudge to tell you the date, but it's been a while.
Yeah, probably. Okay, so Mario, one thing I wanted to point out before we just walked away from your list, you did point out part of Tyrus's kit is his feet, obviously, right? Which is a 2-inch place, which allows you to be aggressive with cats playing with Core Dynamo, which is with the defenses, because cats don't have innate Pathfinder, but his feet grants Pathfinder. It also gives you a 2-inch place, so you double get past that, which is pretty cool. And that's sort of leveraging the kit that he's in there with.
You've got access to Mirage too, so you can have essentially a spin around that piece of defense and be able to project out from that.
For sure. Okay, cool. Well, let's talk. Once you've added your Core Dynamo, then you need to start talking about adding. And Brad, I don't know if we're using some terminology here that Alex likes to use, but we'd like to build something into list called babysitters, which is they can be offensive or defensive. I.e., is this module of the list? It could be a single model or a few models built to go take an objective from someone, or is it built to protect your objective, right? Like to sit and babysit your objective to make sure that it doesn't get stolen by, pig bombers or whatever the guys that come in off the boarding party. I don't remember what the stupid little trolls that come off the side of the board from ambush. God, I hate those things. Anyway.
Yeah, look, I don't know if I'm going to take away from the conversation, because I certainly listened to the terminology being used before, and I think I messaged Cosmos saying that if I start using this in general conversation, I don't know how much longer I can take that. So I don't know if it feels like the terms for how the game defines lists changes every few years, right? Whether it was the McWaters sweeper pivot thing to Core Dynamo or whatever, like, I don't know. I don't necessarily fall into those. I think of how lists should be played, and then how you want to play the game, similar to a like when learning chess, right? Like you envision the end state of the game, and then you work backwards, right? So part of that is short term. You don't necessarily project a turn 7 in your head, or project where the assassination is going to get you on turn 4 or whatever, but you don't have to necessarily go that far, right? At the end of my turn 2, if I'm going first or second, how do I get my models on the table into the spot they want to be at? So, for example, that would be if we're playing Orgoth and I have barragers. I want my barragers in some sort of defensive terrain. So whether it's behind a wall, in a crater, in a trench, whatever, in range to shoot my opponent's models. Where is that on the table? How do I do that, right? How can I make them as strong as they possibly can be? How do I get my my flail tyrant to project its threat range over a 50 mil objective? Where does it need to stand for that? And then you kind of work that problem backwards, right? I do agree that, to use the term you guys have been using, the Core Dynamo is really just the basis of the list, right? If you're going to play Kane, what guns am I bringing to make Kane's feet do anything?
Correct.
You, in theory, could play Kane with all Storm Lances and all melee, but why? It's yeah, so I don't know if I answered any of that question. All I'm getting at is, in terms of babysitting versus Core Dynamo or whatever, I think all the models you're going to take, I think Mark IV is pretty well put together, that it's hard to make a list that doesn't do anything, right? Like right. Like even if the list could be refined, it could be made better, that you could tweak it to have it come together in a different way. That once you get a list together, even if it could be made better, your list is probably fairly competent. And then it's about utilizing it on the table, right? So I think that's where you start having to get into not necessarily thinking about the models as babysitters or anything, but whatever this model's purpose is. And I can answer that in a different way, right? So to think of Crix, I play Crix. Chatterbane has a pretty impressive offensive output between his melee attack, dual attack, and then the gun with pistol with volume fire and all that. You can have him do offensive work, and he's pretty proficient at it. There's also times that all he wants to do is put up ancillary attack, enliven, or repair. So he can go between the both. But what I'm thinking is, or what my thoughts are, is that on turn 2, do I need him to be an offensive model? Is the game I'm playing one that is going to be won by weight of attacks? And if it is, I need to put him in a spot where his gun is going to be relevant. If it's one where it's keeping my models alive, it'll be a game where I am probably putting up Enliven. If I have Hades and I need to put out a wealth of attacks, I'm probably ancillarying Hades' gun. One of the only way to boost out of activation. Actually, phrase that. It is the only way to boost out of activation in the faction is with a soul on Hades during ancillary attacks. So that one model can be in a handful of different spots, serving a handful of different roles. But it all is determined on what your turn needs to look like, right? So deployment in turn 1 is really a setup for how do you get your models in that optimal spot.
I like that. And I think that's you're kind of reinforcing what we were trying to talk about, or the concept we're trying to share, which is you should have a basic game plan for most of the models in your list. Now, things you obviously want to be flexible, and Brad is a very good player, so he's talking about working backwards from what you want to be. But obviously, if you put those barragers in the list, you're going to use those to skirmish and like pepper your opponent, harass them, maybe sit on one of your back objectives, probably most of the time. You know what I mean? Move forward, repo back, whatever, or maybe even repo forward. So the way we think about list design, or at least for newer players, is have a goal in mind for the modules that you put in the list, and they should be flexible. And Brad, you're absolutely right. You're going to change their role as the game goes on, or you may change the role depending on the matchup or the scenario that you're playing in, or any number of plethora, or basically, like you said, I think the way you broke it down was beautiful, which is, where do I want to be at the on turn 2? And then you worked backwards, like, where does it need to deploy? How does it need to move on turn 1 so I can do what it needs to do on turn 2? I think that's actually a very good way to look at it. So, Alex, welcome back.
Hey, thanks, guys. Yeah, I think, Brad, you expressed in a different and very compelling way something that's important, to what I've been calling core dynamos, and you are absolutely right that the terminology changes, all the time. There's a million ways to, skin this particular cat. Not this particular one. But,
don't do that, Cosmo. That's don't.
She's all about the mic stand right now. I might. Come on. No, but something that you said is, it should be obvious at the level of list construction, the way the list wants to play itself or be played. It should be doing a thing which is clear and decisive and effective. This is sort of your plan A. It's if the list gets to tee off, and if Kane gets to, just believe with gun ranges and then walk in and shoot everybody dead, that's kind of where you want to be. But like you said with your Chatterbane example, like, sometimes the circumstances are going to call for different things, and so you have to be prepared to reconceptualize how all these pieces are going to fit together in sort of a no plan survives contact with the enemy sort of way.
It's really interesting. It's really interesting to me, Brad, the way that you sort of conceptualize sort of what I have to put on the table to see. I think that there's a lot of players that can think abstractly about the list in their head and visualize it on the table and where they want to have those models. And like, for me, I have to put that on the table. Like, when I build a list, I have to put it in War Table and play the first 2 turns out in order to see where all of my models go, because I can't do that inside my head. I don't have that sort of abstract mind to think about stuff like that. So I think that for people who are like you that can do that, that's a really interesting skill. And it's a great way to think about list building. But for people that can't, I think it's really important to, when you build a list, put it on the table and then play at least your first turn and see if you actually have space to put the models where you think that they're going to need to be. And that can help with list building as well.
I don't think it necessarily matters if you are thinking about it in advance in your head ahead of time, or if you're putting it on the table to practice it. What was going to change, though, is the positioning of your list is going to be pretty heavily determined by what you're playing against, what the terrain is available to you. So just on like a small example, right? And I'm going to speak again as Crix, because that's where I have all my experience, at least in Mark IV. You get out-threatened by most of everything. It's just a question if it's going to be another melee army or if it's going to be by guns, right? There's very, very often do you get to alpha with Crix, just as the way the faction is designed. So, like, if you're playing against Shard, one of their farthest threatening models, and a model that is in a lot of lists is a Vipex for Hunter's Marks that go even further, are Lashers. And I think Lashes are tremendously good models just into Crix in general. Something that will change where you get to stand on the table, and this is a little dependent on your opponent's positioning as well, but there'll be, say there's a wall on the table, just an actual linear, if you're within an inch, you get you get cover from it, right? The benefit of that wall there is if it's towards like the middle third of the table, there's a decent chance that that wall, even though you don't necessarily need the cover against Shard's guns, right? The Wyvern's a spray, Syl is a spray. Like, a lot of their attacks don't care about the cover. What it will do, though, is prevent the landing spots for those melee models that out-threaten you. So you get to kind of cheat table space and cheat that threat range that you're already out-threatened by, and maybe get an inch or two farther up the board, because the Lasher that would make the charge would have to land on the wall to get you in threat range, and then can't place his 2 friends. Now they just don't get there. So what I mean by, like, how do I get my models where they want to be? I think, and again, this is Crix, so it's going to change whether you're in Khador versus Storm Legion, etc., is you want to be in a spot that where on a round 2 or round 3, your models aren't necessarily in the middle of the board or in your opponent's deployment zone, even though you're all melee, right? But you want to be in a spot to where your models threaten the areas of the board that are scoreable for scenario, right? So I don't need to be on the objective. I need to be able to threaten 3 inches behind the objective with anything. So for sledge thralls, it's threaten 10. What is that? That's 3 inches. I need to be within about 6 inches of the objective, because then anywhere that you stand within 3 of it, I could charge, get you in melee, even if you're on the backside of it, and be able to attack you. So how do I get to stand within 6 inches? If there's that wall there, I can cheat that distance in that way. And if that's not the case, well, then how do I play deep enough to then be able to threaten with the models that are left remaining after I get charged? All in all, it is tough to say concretely this is the way you do it, because the terrain will dictate that heavily. But in terms of conceptualizing the game, from scenario to scenario, from terrain to terrain, to matchup, you're going to kind of get that figured out at the beginning of each game. But just at the end of your turn 2, if your opponent allows you to kind of do whatever you want, how do you get your models to stand where you want them to stand? And if they can't do that because your opponent out threatens you, or they have the range attacks to kind of force you off a spot, what can you do to either enable that? Or if you can't enable it, how do you go somewhere else on the board, right? Like, just, I don't know. I think we're getting into the weeds, or I'm bringing us into the weeds.
But that's an interesting. That's okay though. Go ahead, Alex.
There's an interesting synthesis between something you said, Mario, which is, it is a developed skill to be able to conceptualize the way an army moves in the abstract, and that's pretty difficult to do. Where this meets what Brad is talking about specifically with Crix, and how you have to plan to play around scenario, around terrain, etc. It's gosh, the synthesis is that it's very easy for newer players, when going about list construction, to fall into the trap of supposing, that the limits of what is viable is what is easiest to conceptualize. You tend to see a lot of new players heavily favor alpha strike armies for this reason, because it's very easy to imagine the application of very long threat ranges at high power. Your model's 16 inches away from your opponent. That's a range where you can go get them. But it's not necessarily a robust strategy. This is almost a recommendation for play with training weights on a little bit. Is playing an army like Crix, or in Epoch's past, playing an army like Scorn, where you almost never have the threat range advantage and have to take lumps to get the game sorted. Will very rapidly break you into thinking about okay, I have to have big power, I have to have advantage in numbers, or some kind of internal synergy that lets me punch back. But playing an army that's not the most obvious stuff, like alpha strikes, will actually grow you faster. And you can really lean on your experienced players to say, okay, I know I'm not going to get the alpha strike. Does this look like a list that works? And if they're telling you, yeah, the list paradigm you're on here is, a good and functional one, you can almost treat it as like a training exercise to really develop tactical muscles to figure out how you engage with the game. So lean into your experts and your veterans to tell you when you're on to something, and pursue it, even if it's not obvious.
I wanted to build on Brad's point too, and I think what's important is, Brad, you're almost always out threatened, right? Like always, pretty much.
It's hard not. I think the only thing in Crix that reliably gets you a further threat range than your opponents can leverage is Sub-Zero feat. But then if you're doing that aggressively early to begin the trading, which to be fair, I do often, the risk you run is now Sub-Zero is kind of leading from the front, and while she is a fairly hardy caster, still dies.
Is deadly. Yeah. So that's you just brought up the point exactly what I want to talk about, which is this concept of peace trading, which we talk about all the time. But it's okay to be out threaded. You just put something out there you don't care about, and you just force them to trade something that's more valuable than, it's living that protectorate life, right? Protectorate never out threaded anyone. maybe with some guns, but off their jacks. But for the most part, Protectorate lists were way out threatened. You were never charging with your weapon masters. They were all like speed 5, 1 inch reach. Terrible. Half inch. I think for a long time a lot of them were half inch reach, but they changed that in Mark 3. So
Crix in particular in Mark 4 has a insane ability to take a punch and crack back after that. So
I mean, they have to though, right? There's the whole army threatens like 9-10 inches.
Yeah.
That's how they're designed. You're right.
It's funny, a lot more factions are designed like Scorn was in the old days, and I think it's actually kind of good for the game that that's the case.
For sure. Yeah. Threat range is not everything. I think new players that's how they break down the game, because they think, oh, if I get the charge in, then I'm doing something, which is fine. It's like that jack that moves 17 inches to charge in. Brad, you probably welcome that, right? That 15-point jack charging into your lines. You're just like, okay. It's not supported by anything in your army. I kill it.
Yeah, I mean, generally, yes, right? But it's a question of kind of how much, right? If that jack goes in while 3 units also go in and they're all doing work, you've probably lost too much to get back into the game. If you're playing outside of threat ranges on one flank and one flank is in to where the front's going to get hit and then you can recur some models and counter charge back, then it's probably fine, right? So it's about a balance. As long as it's just the heavy, sure, send it over.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, that's why a 17-inch threat range is great, but you don't want to use the extent of the 17-inch threat range to go deep necessarily and leave your army behind. Sometimes you can use it to get the target that you want, because you have more targets to choose from, and initiate. It allows you to apply force in a way to overwhelm your opponent, because you have that's what the speed buys you. It's not necessarily to charge you on the bottom of 1.
Also, just on like a high level plan as well, right? Like having a threat range of 18, which don't know. I think you can get to 17 with lashers if you dash Hunter's Mark and Kyrax feet. I don't know if you get higher than. I guess Sub-Zero feats 18 statically. Doesn't matter. All I'm getting at is like a threat range that goes that far. Against Crix, again, speaking very Crix-minded here, is the same thing as like a 12-inch threat, right? Like once you out-threaten me, you out-threaten me. It doesn't really matter what the number is on the other side. And the reason for that is as models come into land, if you're playing fairly dense and fairly compacted, your opponent's models have to land somewhere to attack you. And if they've already sent in something to get that first round of attacks in, they've now limited their ability to land additional models, and there's only so many attacks they can get in a turn because of those landing spots are engaging you to prevent, not necessarily prevent, but to give you the bonus defense against guns. So threat range is great, but if you can't use all of it in a turn,
I think that's actually where Crix really shines, is in the scrum. Like when everything is all engaged and there's no charging anymore, you make high value attacks that hit, and they hit very hard, and all your models make multiple attacks. Well, maybe not all of them, but everyone I've seen pretty much does.
That's a good point. Is there any model that doesn't?
Most of them do. So maybe the sludge thralls, right?
No, one melee and a ranged initial, although they do have crit shred, so you can get unlimited melee attacks technically, but you have there's no mechanic in there to try and help those dice crit.
Yeah, but I think that's a design philosophy for Crix, right? Is once you're in the scrum, that's when they really shine, because it's not fun standing in front. Like being all engaged with a Crix army, they're just going to cast Carnage, they're going to Strength of Death, they're going to Scything Touch something, and stuff's going to explode without charges.
You figured out the whole plan. It's a bit of a joke. Short of Decethus, who has Shadowmancer, which gives out Scything Touch to the battle group, or Dark Shroud. I don't know of a single caster where I don't rack Carnage and Scything Touch as the first two. Aside from Decethus, because he already brings it, and then maybe Nicane. But even Nicane, she'll take it, sure.
That's faction defining rack spells. I mean, I'm right there with you in Storm Legion. Like, there has to be a good reason for me not to rack Electrify and Snipe.
Yep.
Well, you also have Ghost Walk too. So if things get into the scrum, like we talked about, you have tools to extract yourself from it as well, which is nice. So
No, exactly. Yeah, like it's like if you want to hit your opponent first, don't play Crix. And I think I forget if it was Cosmo or John. I think it was Cosmo saying that like it's a tremendously good army to help you improve with, because you're going to get out threatened. You have to position well. It's very easy to lose a game very quickly with Crix because your models are too far forward and then they all die, and then you don't have enough to kind of stay in the game and stay relevant.
Or not far forward enough and you lose on scenario, right?
Right, which is also the fear, because you want to stay outside of threat range because you don't want your stuff to get attacked first, but then you're never anywhere relevant, and then that's it. The game kind of just ends unceremoniously.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, you outlined exactly the way that it forces you to begin to think about the game. Like, it forces you to play properly, and it forces you to play properly by saying, well, okay, 12 inches is more than I threat, but if I focus on my opponent's objective, you know, there's only 10 inches of the board that really matters in that localized area of impact. So I'm just going to focus on dominating that 10 inches. And it doesn't matter if they have 7 inches on me in that, you know, essentially in that 10-inch universe.
Yeah, where it gets really fun is when you do have good threat ranges, but you can apply the lessons you learned, like Brad was talking about being out-threated. That's when the game gets really fun for you, right? Because now you have those muscles to play when you're out-threated, and when you have threat range, then it's like playing in the sprinkler in a lot of ways. So it's a lot of, I appreciate that anyway.
Yeah, and the big thing it unlocks for you is, like, you were exactly right when you said, you know, you don't necessarily want to go charging off in advance of the army, because, like, I hope you get something good, because you're a dead man if you do that. What it unlocks for you is, you know, the most common maneuvers are being able to charge laterally. So using your threat advantage to go from one objective to the other very, very quickly. Oh my God, dog. Or to say, okay, you know what? I have this long threading piece. I already out threat you by 7 inches. Rather than trying to project the table at you, I'm just going to hold this model all the way back here where you literally can't interact with it. And it's going to stay perfectly safe. And it'll get its pick of the litter as soon as battle is joined.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that's great about those long threat ranges is an unfired gun is often more powerful than a fired gun in this game. Yeah, you're just like, you know, as soon as somebody feats with Tyrus, right? And you're like, okay, cool. Now I don't have to worry about like 16-inch threading cats anymore. Mm-hmm. We can play a normal game, and I don't have to like have you like reposition all over the place and just get me like I'm trying to give you enough to where you'll feat, but not enough to where you'll cripple me. It's kind of an interesting game when you're playing against Tyrus in that way. Yep. Yeah, and so and that's the beauty of Warmachine. So like here's a pro tip for you, Mario. If somebody holds Tyrus feet for an extra turn, it's very powerful, right? You're just like,
yeah. And oftentimes, you know, you're just threatening that, right? Like, especially in Mark IV, like with trading, a lot of times it's just not the right idea if you're gonna trade up, but not by a lot. Like it's just not worth pulling that trigger unless you're gonna take like way more than the value of what you're getting.
If I can add one thing real quick, so just, I think John, you mentioned earlier, you just mentioned it again now. Like I think value is an important thing to define, right? It's easy to just say the points, and that's not it, right? So I'm gonna keep being a homer, keep hammering home that I'm a Crix player. But if I'm playing against Cosma's Kane list, the Black 13th are almost half the points of Deuce. And if I'm choosing between which of those two things to kill, if I only have one unit that can go, say it's a unit of Sludge Souls, I can either charge Deuce or I can charge the Black 13th. They're nowhere else near each other, so I can't like double up and place in the middle. I'm choosing the Black 13th. They're lower points, but their output into Crix, both the amount of attacks and the fact that they can likely RFP if they're close enough to Kane, is far more valuable than Deuce, even though the points are inverse, right? So value is also going to be a little matchup dependent. The point value of a model isn't necessarily the things you should be targeting.
Yeah,
No,
you,
you gotta-
have to identify when they're the game winners. Like, who are my opponent's game winners? Who are my game winners?
Mhm.
Like, Deuce is a big fat investment, but like, is he gonna get a shot on an unshield guarded Crixjack? Not for a long time. Black 13th matters way more.
100%. So, a good example, at least from my perspective, playing Hazaroth with all my heals, there's a 3-point model in Infernals called like a Wretch or something like that. It's got Entropic, right? Which is Entropic's really hard on Hazaroth because it just stops healing, stops tough rolls. So I'm going to kill that 3-point model before I kill anything else in that army if I can, if I'm playing that matchup. Probably don't play that matchup because I don't think it's particularly good for me in that case, right? But yeah, that's it's a 3-point model, but it has an ability, Entropic Force, that just changes the game for me completely. And so you just have to identify those models that carry those outsized impacts on the game. And so that comes with list mastery or list understanding. Like what really screws your list up, right? So you have to understand that, and then you just that comes down to target priority, right? I got to kill this first. Also, I hate Deuce and the Black 13th, just for the record.
They're both bad for you.
I think Infernals is one of the armies that target priority is probably the most key into. I don't think there's any other army that's a better example of needing to have the correct target priority when you're playing into Infernals.
All right. Well, we were going to do a discussion on math, but I think it's more interesting since we have Brad here. Why don't we expand on this topic a little bit of just developing play and becoming a better player? I think it was really interesting how, Brad, you described how you're thinking about turn 2. And then once you get past turn 2, you're probably thinking about, okay, where do I need to end up on turn 3 to like start winning? And what do I need to accomplish? What do I need to kill? Scenario wise or whatever. I think we could really help new players by giving them some frameworks of thought about how to think about the game on a turn by turn, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. Do you just want to dive into that, or is there any other?
Yeah, let's just dive into it. And Alex, we'll save the math discussion for next week because I think that's going to be a little longer.
Easy
discussion.
peasy.
Yeah.
I have a lot written down, but it's maybe like 10 minutes.
Understood. Yeah.
So just in terms of kind of the thinking through the game, definitely have to think about where your turn 2 is at, where you want your models to be standing at. So if you had ranged models, where would they be standing so that their guns are threatening either scenario elements or open areas of the board where your opponents will have defense or defense increases. That also keep them safe. If you're playing a melee army, how can you put your models both in a spot that are threatening scenario elements and then also just not getting either killed by their guns or getting charged and wiped off the table, right? So then your deployment and your round 1 movement need to allow for both of those things, right? Where it gets difficult is while you're thinking of what your turn 3 looks like, it's really hard to think that far ahead because it's generally a little obvious on where, well, not obvious, but like you can do your best to predict where your opponent's models are going to go, right? Like their fast, low armor, high defense model is going to go find the spot to go get additional cover to try and keep it alive. The models that are a little bit more hardy, the armor 20 Warjack, can probably afford to stand in the open if there's only so many spots to pick. So you can try your best to predict where things are going to go. What's hard to predict is assuming if you put in something in threat range on both flanks, but you can only leverage one at a time, whether that's maybe using the benefit of a hunter's mark or desperate pacing something, you can only desperate one side. So you don't necessarily know which one they're going to pull the trigger on. What you're really planning for after round 2 is assuming you're threatening the scenario elements and you're making it a scenario game, is the models that you did not need to use to make your plan effective on round 2. Are you bringing them out wider so you're putting additional pressure on your opponent, you're keeping them behind your things to have multiple waves that can go in? It's hard to answer that in just kind of a vacuum, but
can you give them a framework of things that you think through when you're making those decisions? Like, am I going forward? Am I going backwards? Am I going narrow and deep, or am I going wide? Like,
Yeah, so I think they're dictated. I'm going to give a non-answer. That's my best to give an answer, right? But it's
Yeah.
dictated on your opponent's list and the scenario you're playing. So I think the
Correct.
first one is the scenario side of it, because those are a bit more binary. Payload, for example, is an incredibly slow scenario where, sure, you get a bonus if you can get your payload to your opponent's terrain feature, and some terrain setup is awful to where it only requires like 2 moves to get there. But assuming you're on a table that needs 3 to 4 moves to get the payload across to the thing, it's an incredibly slow scenario where there's reasonably only 3 things to score. Technically there's 4, but if you're scoring all 4 in a turn, the game's probably over. So yeah, it's an incredibly slow scenario. So to that end, you're not looking to win quickly, because if you are, you're probably overextending. On the converse to that, trench warfare can be incredibly fast with 2 things on your opponent's side of the table that are both worth 2 points. If you can get the cash, or you can get to your opponent's scoreable terrain. And then it's not completely unreasonable on a bottom of 2 or top of 3, depending on the positioning, to end a turn being up 4 or 5 scenario points, where your opponent really has no reasonable way to get to your scoreable terrain, no reasonable way to get to your cache. Sure, they can clear the center 50s, but if they can't get back to your 40 either, it's very likely you're just going to win on scenario on the end of their turn. And now it's only like the round 3 of a game, right? Whereas that's probably not possible in payload. If you're winning on scenario on round 3, to your point earlier, John, they've either positioned too aggressively and everything's died, or they've positioned way too far back and were never relevant. So just general high level, assuming that's not the case and you're kind of playing a trading game, trench warfare can end very quickly, payload can't, or generally can't. So then that is going to mix together with the threat ranges of your opponent. So if you're playing against Crix and you're playing against trench warfare, or playing on trench warfare, oh, my camera went away. I guess you can still hear me, right?
Yep.
All right, great. I'm not going to worry about it. So if you're playing on trench warfare and you're playing against Crix, you can probably afford to under contest your flag terrain. You can probably afford to maybe play a little softer on your cache, because they're not able generally on bottom of 2 to get enough models across the center line to really blow out the scenario, right? It's going to be around 3, around 4, because they're a bit slower. Conversely, you're playing against Shard, who are incredibly fast, have the benefit of Hunter's Mark, a Kyrax feat, dash on the rack, a handful of different internal built tools to just be incredibly fast, right? You need to be more mindful of where to position your models to not have your opponent on bottom of 2 be able to get your flag terrain or kill enough models around your cache to then have a model go up and forfeit action. So in that scenario, Shard on trench warfare, I'm probably playing pretty dense around my cache to make it so they can't clear that, and try to limit landing spots if possible. Or I'm trying on top of 2 to shoot into or charge into the things that would be going for the cache to prevent them from getting to it initially. It's going to be dependent on the matchup and the scenario, but you're really looking for the ways you're going to lose, and then to limit those rather than necessarily look for the ways that you're going to win, right? If you can prevent yourself from losing and then just stay in the game, and this is true even with kind of the alpha lists that maybe don't have the staying power, but if you're making so you don't lose, that will mean you have the models around late game to keep playing. You don't necessarily have to pull the trigger on that unfired gun, as you mentioned earlier, right? You can leave your models back with the Hunter's Mark in tow or the Desperate Pace in tow, and just keep your opponent from moving forward if they don't have a way to interact with you. So all in all, if your opponent's way of winning the game, at least on scenario, right? Like, this is everything we're talking about should be scenario in mind, right? Is to play an aggressive bottom of 2 or top of 3 to where they're clearing caches, scoring flag terrain, getting to your side of the board and scoring things. Then you probably need to posture a bit more aggressively. And if they have the threat ranges to threaten you like that, you should probably play a bit deeper. If their threat ranges are shallower, then you can afford to play wider, because that will then limit where they're able to stand, right? If your opponent's threat ranges are shallow and you play deep, then you can play wide as the shallow threat range army, and you'll begin winning the flanks even though you only threaten 10 inches on each side. So it's
I like
both,
that.
both matter.
Yeah, and so I think what you really illustrated is, and that's kind of the beauty of Warmachine and why I like to call it a beautiful game, is every strategy, every strategic decision you make there's a million factors that go into it, and every tactical decision you make also has a million factors. And so that's why climbing the mountain is so rewarding, because you never really get to the top. There's always things you could, in every game you play, there's always things you could have done better. There's always lessons to be learned in every game that you play. And that's what makes the hobby so fun, I think, is it's just like, it's complex, man. And it'll burn your noodle. And I dig it. I love that. I love that about the game. So, and I think you did a great job of illustrating that.
Yep. That's, I think, Brad, you just put on a masterclass for conceptualizing strategy of threat ranges and strategy of using the whole board. There's really a nested player improvement tip on, inside of this, which is if you're a new player looking to get better and looking to really learn this game, and you've got some veterans around you, begin to cultivate a beer and pizza culture, which is to say you have your games at the game night, or maybe you have your monthly tournament. Like, go get dinner and have some beers and pizza with your old heads. Because often when you've got the game fresh in your mind and you're thinking about it and you're in that, like, deep growth conceptual space where it's opened up to you, hearing something like that, then is going to make a huge difference. So, like, whether it's weekly game nights, whether it's monthly tournaments, whether it's, you just met up with your buddies at a con or something like that, make time for the beer and pizza. Always leave yourself room for a comfortable dinner afterwards, because that's where some of the best learning happens. And
100%.
Like, Brad, the dissertation you dropped on us today is like, this is very much something like after Las Vegas Open or after, Strange Bedfellows, where it's like, this is the kind of conversation that we would have around the table.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was, I think a lot of the reason why a lot of the Muse guys got good in Mark II was because we had these conversations all the time. And that's actually how the podcast got originally started. Is we used to, like, sit in the game store after game night, because the store was open till like midnight. We just sat there and started talking about games and concepts and arguing about what was going to win and what the matchup was. And people started pulling up chairs and just listening to Chad and I and Keith talking about the game. And so we're like, we should probably make this into a podcast, because that's what we did. We just talked about it. And you learn so much by having people to bounce ideas off. And so it's great to have an old head, like Alex said, but it's also great to come up with somebody. So if you can grab your battle buddy, your trench buddy, you know what I mean? Like, you can level up off each other, which is great. I'm a big believer in that. So find a trench buddy and talk about the game with them. You know what I mean? And then, check each other and be like, well, this is what I thought. This was my experiment. This is what happened. Help me unpack this, man. I don't know what to make of it. And they will, and it'll be great. So
I think it's really important to have both, actually. And I think one of the reasons that the end of Mark III got a lot of the criticisms that it did was because when we had new players coming in, they didn't have somebody that they could spar with. They only had players that were veterans, and if they had a bad experience, or the veteran wasn't good at teaching or didn't want to teach, then that's where some of those bad experiences came from. You didn't have that core mass of new players that could interact with each other and learn lessons together. And I think that's better now. So
yeah, the game is growing.
Yeah.
Like, we have 6 new players at my local game store now, which is ridiculous. Yeah, I heard about it tonight. They're like, yeah, 3 guys signed up tonight. They're all excited to play Warmachine now. And I'm like, wild. That's crazy. So it's good.
And you go to the Tried and True store, right? Where the Bevs are at?
I have not been there yet, but it's about a 2-hour drive for me. So I will get there for sure.
Where are you closer to then? I'm sorry.
I'm in Westminster. So they're in Delaware.
Got it.
Yep. So I actually don't know if it's 2 hours. That's just my like thumb in the air.
Yeah.
Probably something like that, depending on traffic, right? Delaware is about an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending on traffic. So
Yep.
But yeah, no, and I get to see those guys all the time. As a matter of fact, Andy Bev, absolutely. I had the most one-sided game of Warmachine I've had probably in over 10 years. I don't think I've gotten beat that bad in forever. It was great. I learned so much. I was like, oh my gosh, I have so much to unpack here. But yeah, I absolutely got raffle stomped because I didn't know what was going to happen. Also, I think he was a little bit outside variance on Ragemonger's feat turn, but we won't talk about that because I'm not a dice whiner. But it wouldn't have mattered anyway.
That feat allows for that, though.
It does. It can happen for sure, and it definitely did. But honestly, it's that's not the reason why I lost. The reason why I lost is I didn't understand the matchup, and I'm not saying I understand it now, but I have something to think about to begin
that's news. Good news for me is my teammate this weekend.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Oh, nice.
You going to Siege?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. So, is it a 3-man team tournament?
Yeah, Friday's a 3-man team tournament. It's myself. Oh, my camera's going again. It's myself and the Bevs on Friday, and then Saturday, Sunday is all solo.
Perfect. So maybe in a couple weeks we could have you and the Bevs on, and we could do a Siege report. That'd be cool if you guys be up for it.
Oh yeah, that would be baller.
Yeah.
Look, I'm not necessarily opposed, but I imagine that the Bevs will probably do that on Tried and True themselves. So I think.
Well,
Erica
already said that she would come on and talk about Siege, and she'd see if she could talk Andy into it. So I've already got inroads there. So I'm just trying to.
In which case, I'll stop finding reasons to say no. You got it.
All right, that's amazing. Digital pimp at work. Sorry, guys. Are you going to be at Siege, Charlie?
I think so. It said, "Hey, see you there."
Yeah.
Unless he's just kind of standing
Oh,
outside
nice.
and using binoculars.
Siege is a 9-hour drive for me, so I'm not going. Instead, I'm flying to Portland.
Siege is
Dragon's
also a
Fury.
9-hour drive for me, and I'm driving.
Yeah, I would drive it. I would 100% drive it, but they didn't have any tickets. So
Fly down to New
This
Orleans.
is
I'll drive over.
this is how you know you're a Midwestern boy at heart. Everything is a car trip.
For sure. I mean, I don't know if you guys remember. In Mark II, I drove to Temple Con from Iowa. I drove to Lock and Load. I drove to, what was the one in Florida?
I drove to Lock and Load from Northern California, and my brother and I said, never again. We're just flying from now on.
I drove to Warmachine weekend like 5 times from New Jersey. It's like a 17-hour drive.
Yeah,
Ugh.
child's play. Totally normal. That's
No, that's a
totally
lie.
normal.
That's a lie. It was like 13. When I drove
Yeah,
to New Orleans,
whatever.
it was 17.
Yeah. Good times though, right? Those car trips are actually epic because those conversations we were talking about,
Mhm.
you get a lot of them and you get into some pretty interesting places. Like
Cosma hates fun is the problem. So he's not
he
gonna.
does hate fun. He does.
I set my limit on, Los Angeles is 5 hours from San Francisco. That's where I draw the line. And now it's San Diego is 5 hours from Phoenix. That's where my line is again.
Can I? Are we near the end here, John?
we're getting ready to close her down. So.
May I just quickly go over the game I would play on card trips on the way to Warmachine events?
100%. Let's hear it.
It's very
I'm
easy.
down.
So here's all you do. The person that won the last round starts off the next round. So John, I'm going to have you start this. I'm going to describe what we're doing first.
Okay.
All you do is you name a category in Warmachine. You can do, I'll give an example at the end of this, but you name a category or any sort of individualized, where there's an answer to the, I'm not explaining this well. I'm just going to give an example, and then we go around the horn. If you repeat an answer, you lose, right? So we could go models that are Mat 9.
All right.
Specifically
Butcher,
Mat 9.
Butcher 5. We'll start with.
There you go. So you run through all the butchers. So like that's all the game is you run through all the models that fits for. If you repeat an answer, you're out. And if you say one that obviously is incorrect, you're out. Last one in wins. One of the
What do you
more
win?
fun ones, you win the ability to go first in the next one.
All right.
You can put dinner on it. You can do whatever, but it's a way to. So it's two things. One, it's a way to kill time because you got a lot of it in the car ride. But two, it's also a way to kind of pick up the random bits of trivia on the way to an event. And I'll give you a good example. And I think this model's still in Prime. But one of the categories on one of the car rides I took was feats that do damage. right? So not like I get an extra focus, I use that to make an attack. Like the feat literally has somewhere it either has a POW or does a damage roll, etc. And it was relevant on that weekend because there's a lesser known part of the cast I'm about to say's feat that I remembered and changed how I played the game. But do you know Wormwood's feat can do damage?
Oh yeah, if you're knocked down, you
take a
suffer a point of damage.
Correct. Learned that in the trivia ride on the car ride there, or not learned, but was refreshed on that because I would have forgotten. Played a game where that was relevant, and then was because I don't. Does it say enemy models?
I believe so.
I believe so.
Yeah. All in all, I just remembered that I was putting my models that had tough in the control range. On the turn, I knew who was going to feat, but if he did that, then I wouldn't get tough after I effectively wouldn't have tough if I passed. So instead, I was contesting with models that didn't have tough, so that I didn't lose that that bonus. But just kind of going through that exercise.
That's a little bit of edge, right? That gave you 1% more to win, or 2%, like a little bit of edge in the game because you didn't lose tough checks on 6 models, say.
What would fuck me up though is I don't know what's in Prime and what's not in Prime for some
That's
things.
hard. Yeah,
so I'm sure
tough.
I'd pick something that's no longer in Prime, and I don't know how I'd do that now in Mark IV if you count unlimited models.
You'd almost have to take the unlimited models out, otherwise it's pretty unfair. You could just do Mark IV models, the newly released stuff. That's probably how I would do it. Yeah, it's more interesting if you do everything, but yeah, for sure. Brad, thanks for jumping on. Alex, Mario, thanks for jumping on, guys. Do any of you guys want to promote anything that you're working on real quick before we sign out?
I got nothing.
You got nothing.
I mean, for me, it's probably too late to sign up, but Dragon's Fury in Portland, if you're not going this year, definitely go next year. JC puts on a fantastic show. It's a wonderful, wonderful qualifier. Day one's a team tournament. If you're not coming this year, definitely come next year.
Very cool. How about you, Mario? You've got a lot to share, so come on.
I don't know how much I want to shill versus how much I want to sort of promote community stuff. But yeah, I'm very sad that I'm not able to make it to Dragon's Fury this year. It's only a 6-hour drive for me. And we did do that drive last year. It's just not going to happen this year, unfortunately. No, we're running the Cascadia Championship Series up here in the Pacific Northwest like we do for the last couple of years. So we have a series of qualifiers throughout the year, very similar to how Iron Gauntlet works. It's just limited to the Pacific Northwest. So it's a opportunity for local players to travel in a smaller distance, try and make it to as many events as possible, and promote travel and promote community. And this year I'm running the invitational. So we're not sure where exactly that's going to happen this year, but that will happen in December of this year. Hopefully we'll be streaming that and getting those games up on YouTube. And I also host a podcast, so about once a month. It's Shop Talk. You can find that on all your streaming services as well. And Alex was kind enough to grace us with his presence last time, so that was
you
good.
should listen to that episode. It's the best. It's the best episode best content I've listened to in forever. It was fantastic. I also want to point out Mario is not going to show these, but I am, because I bought them, which is really weird. Is I bought his tokens. He makes these awesome tokens for Mark IV that have like spell costs. They have a little reminder of what they do, and then my favorite is the command cards, because I can never remember like which command cards did I take in this list again. You know, like I do that all the time. I'm like, yeah.
Where can I buy them?
Mario?
So right now I'm just set up through Facebook. So it's Centurion Tactics is the Facebook page. I have a Facebook page for that. You can message me and I will organize getting those out to you and give you information on how you can purchase those.
Yeah, they're fantastic. So it's I was looking. It's I don't even know how to say this. It's really weird to have owned an accessory company and not have any accessories for a game. Like I haven't lived that life in ages, and it was really weird. So anyway, I appreciate that you put those together, because I was looking for something. I almost ordered some from Sweden. I think it was maybe Sweden, because I liked their tokens. They were 3D printed and they were pretty cool, but it was going to cost me like $140 or $160 for tokens by the time I paid duties and shipping, and I was like, I don't know if I want them that much. So they're very economical for Mario. We'll say that. All right, everyone. We had a great time. I'm really glad everybody showed up. We have 15 people watching this right now at the end of the stream, which is a record for us. So thank you for everyone. Do me a favor and subscribe if you haven't subscribed. I told you if we get to 500 subscribers, we're going to add a third hour to the show. I don't know what we're going to talk about, but I'm sure we'll fill it because we're good about that.
I don't think we have had an episode topic yet where we couldn't have gone for 3 hours
or 6.
Fair enough.
Or 6.
Before we sign out, I just want to say, John, that it was very nice to meet you for the first time. If you had asked me in 2017 if I thought I would ever be on a podcast with John Damaris, I would have told you were crazy. So that's a dream come true for me. And I also want to say that it's very, very, very weird to have somebody reach out to me to buy tokens from me that I purchased tokens from 10 years ago. So that was kind of a weird little mind screw.
That's a one-of-one experience. Like I don't think that's happening in your life again, but potentially, I guess we could talk to Adam Olichschlager. Maybe he or Jonah out from Frozen Forge. Maybe they need him. That'd be cool. But all right, everyone. We love you. Thanks for hanging out. I think the show is getting better. We're having a lot more fun. We were sorry we weren't quite as laser focused as last week on the topics, but I thought the discussion was really interesting. So I'd be interested in your feedback. Yeah, no, I mean, tangents are the best kind of things because you get into interesting places, right? So peace and love, everyone. And we'll see you all soon.